right, so today we're diving into a world that most of us only ever see in headlines, really, the world of gang culture. But we're getting it straight from someone who lived it.
Yeah, I'm talking about Darren.
Exactly, Darren.
Former gang member.
Yeah, and he's got this YouTube channel, right?
Yeah.
And he does not hold back.
No, he lays it all out there.
It's raw, it's unfiltered, and it's, I think, a side of things that that we don't often get to see.
What really struck me about Guy's story is, it goes beyond stereotypes. He's not just talking about violence, the crime. It's the human element.
Absolutely. He talks about ambition, regret, that search for something better, something more.
Yeah.
And he does not sugarcoat it. Like, take, for example, when he talks about being rich, right? Like, at first, it's all about the material stuff, those status symbols.
Right. He wants the flashy car, the R4.
The R32, yeah. He even talks about, like, taking a loss on some of these cars.
Really?
Just to have them parked outside his mom's house.
Wow.
I mean, it's like we've all had those moments, haven't we?
Yeah. I think, yeah, absolutely. We've all been, at some point craved those I've made it possessions.
Totally. But here's the thing, right? His whole definition of rich completely changes after prison.
It's a complete 180. I mean, imagine coming from a place where those material possessions, that was everything.
Right.
And then to realize that true wealth lies somewhere completely different.
It's powerful. And it's really, it's almost like a gut punch when he talks about finding true wealth and family. It is. That kind of realization, especially, considering his past.
Yeah.
Just makes you stop and think, what are we really chasing after? And what are we willing to sacrifice for it?
Absolutely. It's a question his story really makes us ask ourselves,
Yeah.
What do we value? What kind of legacy are we building? And I think for someone like G, who came from a world where loyalty often meant putting the gang above family, that shift is huge.
Absolutely. And speaking of loyalty, he tells this really intense story about a young man, Wes Coulter.
Okay.
And it really gets at the dark side of it all. So Guy's in court, right, for another case. And he sees these young guys, and they're from rival gangs.
Okay.
And just being in that courtroom, he says, it kind of lays bare just how deeply intertwined, like the legal system, prison life, all of it is.
It all kind of converges in that space.
Exactly. So he starts looking into this Wes Porter's case, and he finds out that this young guy is facing a long, long sentence, essentially for being loyal to the older gang members.
And this is where you really see those power dynamics at play. You've got these older gang members, and often, let's be honest, they're master manipulators. They prey on these young people. They dangle this promise of protection, of belonging.
Right, like a sense of family almost.
Yeah, but in reality, they're using them as pawns in their own game.
Yeah, and GC's right through it, too. Like, he straight up calls them rats.
Wow.
For exploiting this kid's loyalty.
It's a harsh assessment, but it's real. It's the reality that he's witnessed. And it's a stark reminder that this blind loyalty, especially in these situations, can be absolutely devastating. And what I find crucial here is that he doesn't just condemn these older gang members, but he uses them as a cautionary tale. Think critically, question those motives, especially when someone claims to have your best interest at heart.
It's something we can all learn from, right?
Absolutely.
Like having the courage to question, to think for ourselves.
Yeah.
Instead of just blindly following.
Absolutely. And this is where the conversation takes even a deeper turn, I think. He doesn't just talk about these individual choices within gang culture. He zooms out and looks at the larger forces at play. He starts talking about the cycle of violence and how it traps generation after generation.
It's like we hear that phrase, cycle of violence, but he makes it feel so real, so present.
He does. And I think it's because he's speaking from a place of such deep regret. He acknowledges his own role in that cycle. He doesn't shy away from the weight of his actions, the pain that he inflicted.
And that's what makes his message resonate so strongly. He paints this really vivid picture of what it's like to grow up surrounded by violence.
Yeah.
How it just seeps into everything.
It becomes all-encompassing.
Yeah. He talks about young people growing up in neighborhoods where fear is a constant, where opportunities feel more like a mirage than reality.
And that's the heart of it.
Yeah.
The systemic inequalities, the poverty, the lack of resources, they all create this kind of fertile ground for this cycle to take root.
Yeah.
And he's challenging us to look at the bigger picture here. How are we as a society complicit in creating these environments where gangs can thrive?
He uses this analogy, right? He
Yeah.
compares the situation in some of these communities to a hostel.
Yeah.
And he's not talking about some cool, trendy backpacker hostel. He's talking about a place of last resort, desperation. He even says he'd rather be in jail.
It's a powerful statement.
It's heavy.
It really underscores that sense of being trapped, the lack of hope that permeates these environments, and it highlights how urgently we need to address the root causes of these issues. We can't just keep locking people up. We need to create those viable alternatives, those support systems to offer real pathways out.
It's like you can't arrest your way out of a problem that's rooted in poverty and lack of opportunity.
Exactly, exactly. And that's where G's message, I think, goes beyond the specific context of gang culture. It becomes about personal responsibility, yeah, but it's also a call to action for all of us to invest in these communities, create opportunities, break down those barriers.
He's challenging us to confront some uncomfortable truths.
For sure.
Because it's easy to get caught up in our own lives and just kind of turn a blind eye.
Yeah, it's that whole out of sight, out of mind mentality.
Exactly. But his story really reminds us that these issues, they affect all of us, whether we realize it or not.
They do. Those ripple effects of poverty, of violence, of despair, they spread far beyond those communities.
It's like that saying, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We can't just isolate these issues and pretend that they don't have a bearing on on society as a whole.
And that's where I think that message of hope comes in, because he's living proof that change is possible, that these cycles can be broken. But it's going to take more than just individual willpower. It takes a collective shift in mindset, a willingness to acknowledge these systemic factors and work towards dismantling them.
It's like he's not saying it's going to be easy. He knows. He's been there,
Yeah.
right? He knows the weight of those choices.
Absolutely.
But he's also seen the other side. He's seen the power of family, of purpose, of finding something beyond the gang.
And that's what he's trying to share, that hope. And that's what's so compelling about him, right? He doesn't try to paint a rosy picture, but he also doesn't let you just wallow in despair.
Right.
You know what I mean? He's living proof that change is possible.
Yeah.
But it takes more than just one person, right? It takes a whole community
Absolutely.
working together to make a real difference.
Yeah, and you can hear it in his voice.
Yeah.
There's this underlying sadness
Oh, absolutely.
throughout the whole thing, right?
Yep.
He's angry,
Mm-hmm.
but there's this deep sadness for the lives lost, for the potential wasted.
Yeah, like a heaviness.
It's like he carries that with him, and it's what fuels him
I think so, yeah.
to try to steer others away from that path.
To break the cycle.
Exactly. It's like it really hits you that these aren't just stories.
Right.
These are real lives.
It's not just headlines.
Yeah, these are real people
Yeah.
caught in incredibly complex situations.
And it's easy to just sit back and judge, isn't it? To point fingers.
It is. It is.
But I think he challenges us to do more than that, to look beyond the surface and to see the humanity in these situations.
Empathize.
Yeah.
To try to understand.
But listen, really listen.
Yeah, absolutely.
And to realize that these issues, they don't exist in a vacuum. They touch every corner of society, whether we acknowledge them or not.
So true. So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive, I'm left with this feeling of what can we do? His story is this powerful call to action, but it also makes you realize just how huge these problems really are.
Yeah, and I think that's the point, isn't it? He's not offering us easy answers here. It's about opening our eyes to the complexity.
Right.
To make us think critically about our roles,
As individuals, as a society.
Exactly, and to ask ourselves some tough questions. What can we do, each of us, to create a different kind of future?
To break those cycles.
Yeah, to leave things better than we found them.
Because the choices we make now, the things we do or don't do, they have a ripple effect.
They really do.
And that's something to think about, isn't it?
Yes.
What kind of legacy are we leaving behind?
That's a powerful question. And are we brave enough to face that, really? That's where the real work begins.
And that's where it starts.